A couple of years ago, I was doing a death notification down in Enumclaw, and I got to the address, and the house was a ways off the road, and there was a gate, so I couldn't drive in there. That should have been my first warning. But I thought, well, I need to go find this person, so I climbed through the gate and started walking up to the house, and as I got closer, I could tell the house was in quite a bit of disrepair, and some of the windows were boarded up, and I couldn't even actually find where the front door is. So I'm walking around the house, and I'm saying, hello, hello. And I got partway around the house, and in response to one of my hellos, I heard dogs. Dogs. Big dogs. So I'm looking around, there's nothing near me except there's a leaf rake leaning up against the house. So I grab the leaf rake and I back up into a corner, and around the corner of the house comes two huge dogs. One was a Rottweiler, the other one I think was maybe a bull mastiff or something. And they came around the corner and we were all praying. I was saying, "Dear Jesus, remember Daniel." They were saying, "Dear Lord, thank you for the food." And so there I was with those beasts with their hackles up, looking at me, licking their lips. And I want to talk to you this morning about courage. And well, we might get back to it. I want to talk to you about courage. And courage is something which is really, humans are really drawn to, and they're really attracted to acts of courage. Whether or not that's a story of courage might be questionable. Maybe more of a story of bad judgment or something else. But regardless, courage is something which is really important and significant. Recently, there was an incident, I think it might have been in Kansas, where a guy came into a place and he was shooting a couple of guys from India. And he tried to intervene, ended up getting shot. And when they asked him about it, he said, well, it didn't seem like it was heroic. It just seemed like the thing I should do, which is often the response of people that act heroically. There's a movie that's just come out that I'm curious to see called Hacksaw Ridge, about true life story about a young man in World War II who, in the midst of one of the most fierce battles in World War II, rescued like 75 men without any, he didn't carry a weapon. And so I'm really intrigued to see that. Incredible stories about courage. I want to talk to you about courage this morning, but I want to talk to you about courage in a different way. It's not courage when your life is at risk, but it's courage that it takes to make a choice or to make a decision or to take a stand when it's not a popular stand or a popular decision, or maybe it's even a difficult one for you in the position that you're in. And in order to do that, I want to look at a lady in the Bible. This account is actually in 3 different places in the New Testament, but I want to look at the account in Luke. It's in Luke chapter 9. And the situation is that Jesus has just got out of the boat, and he's confronted by Jairus, who is the head of the synagogue, one of the synagogue leaders. And his daughter is deathly ill, and so he pleads with Jesus to go and find his daughter, or to lay hands on his daughter and to heal her. And Jesus agrees to go. And while they're on the way, this happens. So I said chapter 9, it's actually chapter 8. Chapter 8, I'm going to start reading to you in verse middle of 42. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. And the other accounts, it said that she had gone to as many doctors as she could, and that she'd spent all of her money, and she'd tracked down every single avenue she could, and she simply had no hope. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Now, what is fascinating about this lady is, because of the Jewish laws, she was not allowed to be in a crowd. She was forbidden to be amongst people. She was what was considered unclean. And she was required not only to not be around clouds, she couldn't even live in the community. She had to live outside the community. And so here's this woman who, through no fault of her own, through nothing that she had done, had this medical issue which caused her to constantly bleed. We don't know when it started. It could perhaps have been something which started when she entered adolescence, when she first started menopause, or it could have happened maybe after a birth, but it had been going on for 12 years. And there were certain requirements for this to happen, but normally a woman, when experienced that, it was only like a week long, and hers was continuing for months turned into months, and months turned into years. And so for 12 years, she'd been dealing with this. And she'd finally come to the place where she had made a choice. She'd made a decision that she was not going to allow society to put her into this box any longer, that she was going to push herself out of it. And she had the faith to do that because of the stories that she heard about Jesus. And she believed perhaps with contact with him, there might be some hope out of this horrible situation that she was in. So I'm fairly positive that when she entered the situation, she was cloaked and covered and hid herself, because it was a requirement of the law. Anytime she got near people, she was supposed to shout out that she was unclean. And she wouldn't want to do that because the crowds would just simply move away from her and she wouldn't have been able to get near Jesus. So she was going up there, I'm sure, covered and cloaked and trying to make as little as possible of herself, and just simply wanted to touch Jesus. A couple weeks ago, Gene and I were in California, and I was walking by a swimming pool, and all around the pool were people with pool bodies in pool uniforms, except for one person. And I remember stopping and seeing this one person, and I was thinking, what they were wearing and the way they looked, I thought, that's really unfortunate. And you know, sometimes God just kind of slaps you alongside the head. It was one of those moments. And as soon as I had those thoughts, I felt very ashamed of myself for having those thoughts. And here was a person who didn't fit the mold, who didn't fit the norm, but was perfectly comfortable in being who they were. And suddenly my feelings changed from to, wow, I'm really proud of that person. I am so proud of that person that they refused to allow society to set limits for how they should look or how they should behave in public. And it wasn't that they were being immodest or anything. They were completely modest, but they just simply weren't ashamed of the body that God had given them. And I understand that there is a responsibility for us to take care of our bodies to a certain extent, but I just was so proud of this person that they chose to live their life in a way to enjoy it with the body that God had given them. And I really wanted to go up and just tell them how proud I was, but I didn't want to embarrass myself or them. I was reading a book this week, and I came across the passage that I want to read to you. The book is called The Love Warrior by Glennon Milton. I was loved just like my daughter is loved, and still one evening she sat on the edge of my bed, looked up at me with naked brown eyes and said, "I'm big, Mama. I'm bigger than the other girls. Why am I different? I want to be small again." Her words came out jagged, like she hated to break this to me, like she was ashamed to reveal her hidden truth. I took in her tears, pigtails, lip gloss, and the dirt on her hands left over from climbing the banyan tree in our front yard. I scanned my mind for a response worthy of her, but there was nothing to find. Everything I'd learned about bodies, womanhood, power, and pain scattered upon hearing how my little girl said the word big. Like big was her curse, her irrefutable condition, her secret, her fall from grace. Like big was something inevitably unfolding inside of her that threatened her contact with the world. My daughter was not asking, how will I deal with my body size? My daughter was asking, how will I survive being this particular type of person in this particular type of world? How will I stay small like the world wants me to be? And if I keep growing, how will anyone love me? I looked at my daughter, and I did not say, but you do not look big, honey. She didn't, but neither do I. I've never looked big a day in my life. No matter, my daughter and I pay attention. We know what the world wants from us. We know we must decide whether to stay small, quiet, and uncomplicated, or allow ourselves to grow as big and loud and complex as we were made to be. Every girl, and I would say every boy, must decide whether to be true to herself or true to the world. Every girl must decide whether to settle for adoration or fight for love. There on the bed, in her pigtails and in pain, my daughter was me, the little girl I once was, the woman I now am, still struggling to answer the question, how can I be expansive and free and still be loved? Am I going to be a lady, or am I going to be fully human? Do I trust the unfolding continuing to grow, or do I shut off all this down so I fit? I read that and I thought, wow, that's true on so many different levels, because society wants to put us in little boxes. And oftentimes the church does that as well, doesn't it? The church has very tight little boxes that they want us to fit into. And some of those boxes are for our own good and they're healthy, but some of them are simply because that's the way the church has responded to humans for the past 2,000 years. So here's a woman who encourages me. She encourages me because society wanted her to fit into a box, and she chose to not stay in that box. She chose to be something more. But the story doesn't end there. It's interesting because it says immediately her bleeding stopped. And so you think, wow, success, that's the end of the story. But there's something more. Who touched me? Jesus said. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing around you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people. See, to this point, they still didn't know she was even there. But in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. At the time that this was written, women were viewed as something about on the same level as your other possessions, even in Jewish cultures, although slightly higher in Jewish cultures, but not very much. There's one writer at that time that talks about the difference between men and women, and he says men have the perfect body, and women have an inferior body, and his conclusion is that all children start out to be men when they are conceived, but that there's not enough heat in the womb. And when there's not enough heat, the body doesn't develop properly and becomes a woman. And so this is the culture that this woman lived in, that women were considered to be inferior. And so understand that her action as a woman in touching a man was worthy of even death. And so when Jesus turned around and said, who touched me? For her as a woman to declare that she as a woman was touching not only a man, but a holy man, could have very well led to her death, even though she was healed. But she took that risk. And she said, yeah, it was me. And then the beautiful thing is about how Jesus responds to her. And says, you're well. Your faith has healed you. And can you imagine the reaction that woman, with her stand, with her decision to take the risk, how that affected the other women in that culture and in that community? Suddenly they felt emboldened. Suddenly they felt like something more than they were before. Sometimes courage requires us to take a position, to take a stand which is not comfortable in our society and maybe even sometimes not comfortable in our church. You may ask yourself, how do I know that I'm taking the stand I'm supposed to take? And I believe that the key to this is being able to clearly hear the voice of Jesus. And you learn to hear the voice of Jesus by studying Jesus. And I am convinced that every Christian needs to begin and spend a great deal of time studying the person and the works of Jesus in the Gospels. Because until you become completely familiar with how Jesus responds to everything, it is very difficult to hear his voice. It can be confusing. And people have studied the Bible their whole life and still have come to conclusions that I think are diametrically opposed to the person of who Jesus Christ is. If you want to know how to respond to social justice, look at Jesus clearing the temple. Understand what's going on there. If you feel like you're judgmental towards someone, look at how Jesus treated this woman or the woman caught in the act of adultery. If you're struggling with the poor and the needy, look at the story of the Good Samaritan. If you're wondering if we have a God that is forgiving, look at the story of the prodigal son. We need to study those things and understand and learn to hear the voice of Jesus. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice, and they hear it." And there are some people in our world today that claim to be Christians that are saying things that do not sound like Jesus' voice to me at all. I believe that you actually need to hear the voice of Jesus when you're reading the rest of the Bible. When you read Paul, you shouldn't hear Paul, you should hear Jesus. Because there's some Paul in there too, and you need to get beyond Paul and hear Jesus. When you're reading Peter, when you're reading the Old Testament, when you're reading the prophets, don't listen for Jeremiah's voice, listen for Jesus' voice. And as you start to learn to identify the voice of Jesus, and you become confident that it's Jesus calling you to step out of your robe, to step out of your comfort, to be something that you never imagined that you could, then God can truly change your life in incredible ways. Those acts of courage can be incredible, not only to your life, but to the world. And that's the beginning, I believe, of really becoming world changers. So I was standing there up against the wall with my little leaf rake, and these two dogs standing just a few feet away looking at me. And just as they were kind of around the corner, getting ready to see what they were about, their master called, and they stopped, and they paused. And I had this moment of thinking, are they going to obey the master? Or are they going to obey their instincts? And I was praying for the master. And fortunately, the master called again, and they turned and obeyed the master, went back. And that was a great lesson to me. As I thought about this, I thought about how important it is for us to discern and to know that Jesus is speaking into us and is leading us and guiding us, and we're making choices and we're stepping out. We know, yeah, this is the path I'm supposed to walk because I can hear the voice of Jesus leading me. We're going to conclude our service this morning with singing another chorus together. Would you stand as we do so?